Hello everyone, my name is Gajendra Das Sharma and you are watching English, and in this video we are going to explain some of the important questions primarily for UPTGT, PGT, UPGIC and LT grade examination. These questions are based on the particular syllabus prescribed for these examinations. In this video you will have detailed explanation of each question so that you can understand the question itself completely and you can have also other points related to that question. So let us start this video. The first question is, who was the publisher of the Shakespearean sonnets? William Herbert, Thomas Thorpe, Henry Wriothesley, William Hall. The correct answer is it was Thomas Thorpe. Shakespeare's sonnets were published in 1609 and the author of the publication was Thomas Thorpe, as is clear by the dedication by the author. Like the author of the dedication was, that is Thomas Thorpe. The publication was dedicated to someone by the title W.H. Now W.H. can be William Herbert, who was Earl of Pembroke, or it can be Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton. It is not that very much clear as to who was the person of this dedication. The author was Thomas Thorpe and the person of this dedication was Mr. W.H. W.H. can be Mr. William Herbert or Henry Wriothesley. It is said that these sonnets were written in 1590s and they were collected and published by this Thomas Thorpe. They were published under the title Shakespeare's Sonnets. There were 154 sonnets in all and they were printed in quarto form. Quarto form you can understand when a printer's sheet is folded twice. So it has 4 pages. One sheet has 4 pages. On those 4 pages were printed these sonnets. In quarto form, many of Shakespeare's plays were also published. The plays that were published in his lifetime were published in quarto form. And the plays that were published in first folio, they were in folio form. Folio was the printer's sheet is folded once. When the printer's sheet is folded once, making 2 pages, it is folio. When the printer's sheet is folded twice, making 4 pages, it is quarto form. So these sonnets were printed in quarto form. The sonnets were quite different from the Petrarchan sonnet form. Shakespeare's sonnets were divided into 3 quatrains, and a concluding couplet. The rhyming scheme is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF and GG. So these 3 quatrains and a couplet. Thomas Thorpe also published the sonnets of Ben Jonson, John Marston and George Chapman. Next question, the separation of styles in accordance with the class appears more consistently than in medieval works of literature and art. Fill in the blanks. Was it Ben Jonson, Shakespeare, Philip Sidney, Edmund Spenser? The correct answer is it was Shakespeare. The separation of style in accordance with class appears more consistently than in Shakespeare. As far as style is concerned, so in all the dramas you can feel that the type of content had a different style. If he was writing for the comic scenes, so his style was different. If he was writing for the tragic scenes, his style was quite different. If he was writing for interludes, his style was for different. You can also feel that he has used many slang words. He has coined many words that suit his purpose. He has used many quibbles, conceits. Wherever there is a requirement of an elegant style, he has that elegant style. Like in soliloquies of Macbeth, Hamlet, Othello, Lear, Antony. So we have the grandness in those soliloquies. So we have some of the greatest passages of English literature in Shakespeare. And as far as the lighter characters are concerned, or the mean type of characters are concerned, so he has used the language similarly that could suit their language. just like the language of Caliban, the language of Trinculo when we see in Tempest, the language of Maria in the Twelfth Night. So Shakespeare has adjusted with his style according to the class he is presenting. If it is an aristocratic royal class, so the language or the style is stately, and when he is presenting the meaner kind of characters, the clowns perhaps, or some low level characters, so his style or the language is quite different. Mingling of prose and verse justifies this statement. In his comic scenes, in between the tragic scenes, he has used prose, and for regular stately expressions, he has used verse. So he has made it very clear to separate his styles in accordance with the class that he has presented in his plays. Next question. Had we but world enough and times, this coyness lady were no crime. This statement is an example of irony, paradox, hyperbole, euphemism. The correct answer is it is an example of paradox. Paradox is a Greek word that means beside or beyond opinion. It is a self-contradictory or even absurd statement which seems to have some truth when it is looked into on a closer range, is found to have truth of some type sort when you look at closer range. So paradox is a kind of statement which seems to be absurd, irrational when you see on a surface level, but when you try to look into it, try to interpret it in a closer range, so you find some truth. Just like child is the father of man. So on the surface level it seems to be quite absurd, quite irrational. How come a child can be a father of man? But when you try to interpret it from the philosophy of Wordsworth himself, from his point of view, so we can find some truth. Similarly, in this statement, the poet wants to say that the beloved is showing some kind of coyness. Coyness matlab modesty, shyness. Sometimes this is also asked, what does this word coyness mean? So it is shyness. So when the beloved shows some kind of modesty, some kind of shyness, it is justifiable when the people have unlimited time, when there is unlimited space and unlimited time. So if the beloved shows some kind of shyness, it is justifiable. He can have many moments later, he can have many spaces later, because then the people will be not in a hurry. They will not be in that hurry or hustle bustle. But since the time is fleeting, the people have only limited period of their time, limited period of their life. They have limited resources, limited space. And if the lady or the beloved shows shyness, it is no less than a crime. So on the one hand, it seems to be contradicting itself. How come this is a matter of crime in a present moment? And how come it is not a crime when they had time? From the point of view of a lover, if his beloved showed some kind of coyness, so it is a matter of crime for her, whether it is at the present moment or in an unlimited time. So from the point of view of a lover, if his beloved shows shyness and they have no time, so it is just like a crime. The lover, however, can adjust if he has a lot of time, because then he can convince her, he can wait for that moment, or he can adjust with this coyness for a length of time. Now he wants to make the best use of this moment. The concept of carpe diem is here mentioned. He wants to make the best use of the present moment, and as such his beloved is not cooperating, so he calls this shyness to be a crime. But the same coyness would not be any crime if they had time. So it seems to be self-contradictory. Modesty is a crime even if he has no time, or even if he has lot of time, if coyness is to be labeled as crime. But here he says that when he has lot of time, so coyness is no crime, and since he has no time, very limited time, so this coyness is next to crime. It is a criminal activity on the part of the lady not to accept his proposal. So on the one hand, it seems to be contradicting itself, and from the other point of view of the lover, it's a matter of present time. It's a matter of living the present time, and anything that hinders is just like a criminal activity. Irony is when what we say and what we mean, what we intend, they are two different things. This is irony. When we say something else, when we do something else, when we see something else, and what actually is something else. So it is irony. Hyperbole is to exaggerate the things. When we exaggerate the things, so we are making the use of hyperbole. Euphemism is decorative, precious, or somewhat mazy style of writing. When the writer writes in a decorated, embellished, or rich language, so it is called euphemism. Or when the writer uses sophisticated language, sophisticated expressions in order to express himself, it is euphemism. Euphemism takes its birth from John Lilly. Euphuse, The Anatomy of Wit, and Euphuse and His England. In these two works, John Lilly used this style. Euphemism, in fact, euphemism is a Greek word which means well endowed by nature. Well endowed by nature. So when we embellish, decorate something, John Lilly started a new kind of style called euphemism. Next question. The artist may be present in his work like God in creation, invisible, almighty, everywhere felt but nowhere seen. Henry James is talking here about artists, impersonality, absence, presence, creativity. The correct answer is the statement suggests a writer's impersonality. This statement echoes the theory of impersonality of T.S. Eliot, which suggests that artist may be present in his work like God in creation, means artist is the creator, so his presence will be there, of course. But this presence should be invisible and powerful. It can be felt, it should not be overtly seen in the work itself. While reading the work, we may not feel that we are reading something about the writer. Writer's personality has no meaning in the work, particularly in the views of Henry James or the critics like T.S. Eliot. Henry James makes this statement in The Art of Fiction that was published in 1884. It is an essay. It is not a book, it is an essay. And that was published in Longman's magazine. Here in this book, he argues against the rigid, the strong, or the strict prescriptions on the novelist. Here he argues against the strict prescriptions of the novelist's choice of subject matter and method of treatment. So novelist, when he is writing something, he should be free to choose his subject matter, his method of treatment. He should be let create in his own way. There should not be many do's and don'ts and many prescriptions as to how to write this novel and what to be kept in mind or this or that. So art of fiction will be, so in this essay he tries to say that artist, when he is quite free, creates something better. He also says that the widest possible freedom in content and approach would help ensure narrative fiction's continued vitality. So when the writer is free from all kinds of prefixed prescriptions in the choice of his subject, in the choice of his content, so this approach would help ensure that narrative fiction will be of vital importance. It will be real fiction. It will be original and genuine one. When the writer has prefixed notions, the pressure of prefixed notions and rules and regulations, so he may feel crippled, he may feel restricted, his imaginative power may not work that freely. Through this statement, the writer wants to say that the artist should be let free or let freely think, freely express, and only when the creation, particularly he talks about this thing in novel. T.S. Eliot's theory is primarily for poetry, but unlike him, Henry James says something or talks about something for the novel, the fiction. Here we can compare two critics. Henry James, he writes something for fiction, and T.S. Eliot, he writes this theory, he propounds this theory for poetry. Next question. The greatness of the poet, Arnold says, lies in his powerful and beautiful application of ideas to life. But this statement is confuted or protested by a critic who says that it was not a happy way of putting it, as if ideas were a lotion for the inflamed skin of suffering humanity. Who was that critic? Was it T.S. Eliot, F.R. Lewis, David Laws, or Alan Tate? And the correct answer is T.S. Eliot. Eliot seems to be against this view of Matthew Arnold, when he says that greatest of the poet lies in his powerful and beautiful applications of ideas to life. When he says poetry is the criticism of life, and he says that the poet is great only when his powerful and beautiful ideas are applicable to life, as if he is prescribing certain ideals, certain norms, certain words, certain expressions to heal the humanity or to guide the life. Here T.S. Eliot seems to be against this notion. He says that ideas are not such kind of lotion or kind of drug or kind of medicine which can be applied on the inflammatory part of the humanity or the suffering of humanity. Ideas are not some kind of lotion, some kind of balm which can be applied on the outer surface of the suffering. Arnold seems to be saying the didactic purpose, didactic aim of the poet. He feels that whatever the artist creates should have a constructive influence on mankind or in life. The other critic, T.S. Eliot, does not feel so. He feels that literature is literature whether it heals the wounds of the humanity or not. If it entertains, then it is the end of poetry. The poet is not to heal the wounds. Poet is to show the mankind, show the people what the people themselves are incapable of seeing. Next question. The glory shall never his wrath or might extort from me. The quote is from Paradise Lost, Book 1. Then what glory is being referred to by Satan? The courage never to submit or yield, to reign in hell, to defeat God, to spread evil. The correct answer is the courage never to submit or yield. Now Satan is talking about his courage, his invincible courage, incongruable will. And that courage, the God, even if God is so powerful, he is so angry, but that courage cannot be snatched from him. He makes it very clear that God can defeat him, but God cannot take this gift, the courage. If he has the courage, he will bounce back. He will fight back. Certainly he will do something in retaliation. He will do something in retaliation. So this courage is the glory, and this glory even God cannot deprive him of. However powerful he is, however angry he is, but God cannot deprive Satan of this glory of that courage. Courage which says him to never to submit or yield. The urge never to submit or yield. The urge that he will never submit, surrender before God. This urge will remain in him till his very last breath. So the complete quote, as we can see here, it says clearly. Next question. Which of the following works is not actually a prose essay? Essay on dramatic poesy, essay on man, essay concerning human understanding, an essay towards a new theory of vision. The correct answer is it is essay on man, that is not a prose essay. Rather, it is a poem by Alexander Pope. It is a very famous poem in which Alexander Pope has given many important quotations, many maxims like little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So it is replete with many quotations. Essay on dramatic poesy is a kind of conversational essay, critical essay by Dryden, where he gives his theory about drama, fiction, tragedy, where he poses it is in the form of conversation among four people. The Dryden is also one of the characters. Essay concerning human understanding is an essay, long essay perhaps, or treatise long essay by John Locke. It is a philosophical essay. An essay towards a new theory of vision is an essay by George Berkeley. It was published in 1709. Next question. Competence to age is supplementary to youth. A sorry supplement indeed. But I fear the best that is to be had. We must ride where we formerly walked, live better and be softer, and shall be wise to do so. Then when we had means to do in the good old days you speak of. Who speaks these words to whom? Charles Lamb to his sister Bridget, Wordsworth to his sister Dorothy, Dorothy to Bridget, Lamb to Dorothy. The correct answer is Charles Lamb is talking to Bridget. It is an extract from Old China. This was an essay of Ilya. So that is all for now. Hopefully this video added something to your present knowledge about the writers and poets who have been prescribed in your syllabus. We'll come back with yet another video with renewed or different kind of MCQs on these writers. Till then, stay tuned, keep learning, stay motivated. Like this video and share it among your friends. And if you have not subscribed to the channel so far, make it as a point to do it right now. Thanks for watching.